Hieronymus Bosch. His name, Hieronymus, is the Latin form of Jerome. And he comes from a town that we haven't talked about before, 's-Hertogenbosch. 's-Hertogenbosch is in the North Netherlands. And we don't know his birth date. When people feel they must give a birth date, they say somewhere around 1450. But that's based on extremely little evidence. The fact that the first document that they have of him from 1474, he is an adult at the time. And that's basically all they know. So we don't know exactly when he was born. We do know the year he died, in 1516. This is a 16th century drawing that says that it's Hieronymus Bosch. It's from the Codex ARTH, this book of pictures, drawings of famous people. He was born in 's-Hertogenbosch in the North Netherlands, and the name, you can kind of break it down. Hertogen would be the duke. Bosch would be woods or forest. So it really translates as the Duke's Woods. He comes from, a long line of painters, from a family of painters. We know that his grandfather was a painter, that his father was a painter, that his uncles were painters, that his brother was a painter. So it's a painting family. But they did not use the name Bosch. They used, for the family name, they used von Aachen, which probably means from Aachen, which of course is a town, a city in Germany that's today would be right over the border from Belgium. You know, if you get on the train in Brussels and you want to go through Cologne, stop off in Aachen and see the Palatine Chapel. Charlemagne's Palace Chapel is still there. But Bosch changes his name. Maybe he feels he's not from Aachen, von Aachen. He's from 's-Hertogenbosch. So he changes his name to Bosch. If he were English, it would be Jerome Woods or Jerome Force, but you do need to use the name Bosch. Now, we know something about some of the commissions that he had that don't survive anymore. He did get commissions locally for the church at 's-Hertogenbosch and also for the Confraternity of Our Lady. And both his father and he were members of this confraternity, which was very prestigious. Someone said that the members were priests and patricians. Now, how could a painter, a manual craftsperson, qualify as a patrician? Well, actually, he did very well for himself. He married into a wealthy family, and he seems to have had a comfortable living. They're judging from the taxes that he paid. And around 1500s, his taxes were rising, and they assumed this is because his wealth was rising as he became a very popular painter and had a lot of commissions. Judging from the tax record, by 1512 to 13, he is the sixth wealthiest citizen in town. He and his wife lived in the house that had been her grandfather's, which was right across the street from the city hall. It's in the sort of main political and financial area in 's-Hertogenbosch. He's unusual, well, in a number of ways, but for one reason, he signed his paintings on the painting, not on the frame. Well, I mean, maybe he did sign some on some frames that we don't know about, but we do know that there are 8 works that most people consider to be authentic works, really by Hieronymus Bosch, that he signed. And here is the signature from one of them, from the Hermit's Triptych, which we won't be showing you. Now, one of the problems is that some of his followers also signed his name on their paintings. And there's a 16th century source, Felipe de Rivera, and he says, he talks about a particular pupil of Bosch, and he tells us, very, very good, and he signs his master's name on the paintings. He doesn't know whether that's, like homage to the master, or if it's just because he figures the paintings will sell better. So you can make up your mind about that. Unfortunately, we have no dated paintings by Bosch. So all the dates that we're giving you in the course, you will find different dates from different sources. The first example, the first work we're going to talk about, actually, there's a wide disparity in dates that's given to it. So people have to figure out some way of thinking, well, which Boschs would be the earliest and the latest. And they may not agree with the supposition that someone else has. So we're not going to do too much with dating. I'm going to talk to you about this one. The first thing that's in your textbook that we're going to talk about is this tabletop that is painted with the 7 deadly sins and the 4 last things. And you'll notice that your textbook, Jim Snyder's book, dates this about 1480 to 85. And Larry Silver, who wrote a book on Bosch, thinks that it's after 1500. Well, that's a pretty wide gap, actually. Why? Well, I don't know exactly. Larry Silver said why. It may be because it does not seem to be quite as deep as some of his works. That the painting quality may not be, as high. That Snyder may say, well, this must be an early work. Snyder probably died before they published the information from infrared reflectography, but Silver talks about it, and he says that the underdrawings are in Bosch style, and they show pentimenti. And we talked about what pentimenti meant, when you're talking about Roger van der Weyden, for example, or Robert Campin. Pentimenti is an Italian word. It means thoughts, but we could kind of think of it as meaning first thoughts. In other words, I put something down and then I change my mind. I'm still thinking about it. So there are changes from the underdrawing to the surface, and you can see him making changes, which suggests that it is a design by Hieronymus Bosch, because if somebody were just copying it, they wouldn't have to make those kind of changes. So Larry Silver suggests that it's probably a design by Hieronymus Bosch with his underdrawing, and that there is some workshop execution in it. And he thinks this suggests that it could be later in his life when he's more popular, getting lots of commissions. But I guess you can date it anywhere from 1480 to after 1500, because there's arguments to be made for both sides. Okay, we said the 7 deadly sins. You've probably heard of those. What are the 4 last things? And those are those circles that you see in the corners. Death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Everyone's going to die. According to Christian belief, everyone will be judged. And then they will be going either to heaven or hell. So those are the 4 last things. And then you have this big circle in the center, and around it are scenes with the 7 deadly sins. They're almost like a genre painting. They're little scenes of everyday activity, but the everyday activity is sinful. Now, the inscriptions on the banderols give us an indication of what this is all about. They're both from Deuteronomy, And on the top, it translates as, "For they are a nation void of counsel, and there is no understanding in them. If they were wise, they would understand this. They would discern their later end." So they're talking about people, even a nation, where they don't think about their later end. They don't think about their spiritual well-being. They continue to sin. The bottom banderole or scroll says, it's God speaking. It says, "I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be. For they are a perverse generation, children in whom there is no faithfulness." And that, I'll hide my face from them. I'm not going to give them my favor, but I'm going to be watching is essentially, as we'll see, carried out pictorially in this work of art. We should mention the circles. Bosch does use circles a number of times for his paintings. And circles have a number of associations. They are, in the 15th century, the shape of a mirror. Remember the convex mirror on the back wall of Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini double portrait. So they are the shape of a mirror. They reflect, they show. It's also the shape of the universe, or the shape of the earth, because it was believed that the earth was a sphere. So a circle is a flattened sphere, if you will. The earth was a sphere in the center of the universe. And then there were the concentric circles of the planets, the wandering bodies in the heaven that you can see with the naked eye, which would be the moon, the sun, and the planets that you can see, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And you could also see those, of course, with some of the early telescopes, but they had to have much more advanced telescopes before they could see the further planets. Another shape is, it's the shape of a ball, and including an eyeball. And as I said, that's going to really be pictorially, this is pictorially very important for this painting. Right in the center, you have a series of concentric circles, and in the center there is an image of Christ as the man of sorrows. And he's pointing to the wound in his side. He's holding up his other hand. It's very small in this reproduction, but presumably what he's doing is showing the wound that's in his hand as well. And there's an inscription below in Latin, "Cave, cave," which means beware, beware. And then there's an abbreviation, it's DUS, so it could be either Deus, God, or Dominos, Lord. And then the last word, videt, means sees. So beware, beware, God sees, or beware, beware, the Lord sees. Same meaning. Radiating from the center are a series of lines. And this gives the center circles the appearance of the iris in the eye, with Christ in the pupil. It also suggests things like rays of sunlight, rays coming from the sun. Well, let's look at the 7 deadly sins and the 4 last things. And of course, the inscription is warning the viewer, that God, or the Lord, sees all their sins. And he's also showing what to do about it, because as he points to the wound in his side, he's reminding the viewer that Christ died to redeem humanity from sin. So let's look at each of these 7 deadly sins. the first one I'm showing you is avaritia, or greed. And here you see some people involved, presumably with some shady financial dealings. I'm presuming they're going to try to cheat the poor man, out of his coin. They seem to be, they have their money bags handy, they have their purses handy, and they're conferring. Then there is invidia, or envy. And it's kind of interesting, what different kinds of envy are they talking about? They seem to mean by envy coveting something that someone else has. So you can see this, I'm calling him a tradesman because he's middle class, so presumably that's the social class. But there's this man in, his house. He's looking out over the door, and he's sort of glowering at this aristocratic young man who's has a lot of leisure. He can go hawking. He's holding his hawk by his hand. And his servant is carrying this huge bag of presumably grain or food or something like that back to his palace. He doesn't even have to carry it himself. So the older middle class guy is jealous. He envies the wealthy aristocrat. His ease of life. Next to him, his daughter is sort of she's inside the house, and it's like there's little bars that are keeping her and her suitor apart. So presumably the suitor is coveting the young woman. He'd like to, we hope, marry. And then you have two dogs, and one of them is just barking at the man who's not paying any attention to him. This older man, he's looking at the rich guy. And the older man is holding this big bone in his hand, and the dog is barking, barking, barking. Well, the dog wants that bone, so he's, envious of the man because he's got the bone. And it's also sort of interesting because when you look at it, there's other bones lying on the ground. So the dog does have bones. He just wants that bone. And the same thing, the envious older man does seem to have a comfortable house. He's not poverty-stricken, but he's still envious of the person who has more. So you might say you start to make up little stories. And as I said, it's almost like, they're little genre paintings with a moral. Wrath, or ira, and also known as choler or anger, is when you get really angry and violent. And here you can see there's been these figures have been having a knockdown, drag-out fight. Somebody's hit somebody else over the head with a stool here, or a little table. And the man has a sword out. It looks like he's going to try to kill the other person. And he's holding a pitcher, so presumably his ira, his wrath, his choler, was fueled on by drink as well. When I first looked at this, I thought he was trying to kill his wife, but the more I look at it, the more I think his wife is trying to restrain him from doing bodily damage to the man in brown, the man he's fighting with. None of them look very happy. Superbia, or pride, is supposed to be the worst of the seven deadly sins, the sin from which all the other sins progress. But in this case, Bosch is using it more as a kind of vanity, really, because it's a woman's pride in her appearance, perhaps the furnishings of her house, which are quite well to do. You can see all those pitchers and vessels at the top of the piece of furniture. And she's admiring herself in one of these convex mirrors. And she's got an elaborate headdress on. And who is holding up the mirror for her but a devil, and wearing the same type of headdress? There's a chest or a box down on the floor, and this seems to be her jewel box, from which possibly she's gotten jewels out, although we don't see those. But we do see that there is a rosary. It's coiled over the end of the box, but she's just left it in the box. She's not using it. In other words, she's not paying any attention to spiritual things. And if you look through the doorway into the next room, there's a young man, perhaps her son, and he's also admiring himself in the mirror. So 2 examples of superbia or pride. Luxuria is usually translated lust, but it also has a wider implication of, enjoying sensual pleasures which include and lead to lust. So here we have some aristocrats lounging around, being entertained by their fools. And presumably they were also entertained with the musical instruments. There's a harp, a kind of recorder there. And often, musical instruments accompanying loving pairs of people do suggest luxuria or lust. And you can see that the couple in the back, it looks like the man is probably propositioning the woman. They're getting together. Acedia or sloth. Here's another one of the examples where the person is ignoring his spiritual well-being to follow one of the deadly sins. The nun is here. She's holding out a rosary. She has a prayer book in her hand. But the man is paying no attention. He's gotten up and gotten dressed. He looks like he's ready to go outside. But instead, he's laid back, got a soft pillow, and is taking a little snooze in the middle of the day. His dog, likewise, is having a little snooze. There's a book there. Is it for, we don't know if it's a religious book or a book of records or something like that. There's a little niche with a spindle in it, which is not in use. So suggesting someone who's just, idling away his days. Gluttony, this one's pretty obvious. Gula or gluttony, and everybody in the picture, from the fat man, the thin man, this big fat dirty baby, is they're just devouring food and drink, and the baby is asking for more. The baby's trying to get some, and the father isn't giving his son the food, but it looks like he's had plenty, and the mother's bringing even more food. Another roast piglet or something. There's like I say, lots of food. There's a toasting stick here, the 2 prongs with a sausage on it to be cooked over the fire. And there's a little potty chair there for the baby or for the toddler, because after you eat all this stuff, well, it's got to go somewhere. Okay, those are the 7 deadly sins. If you have practiced any or all of these and have not repented, well, you'll know where you go after death, they believed. And when we say the deadly sins, we mean mortal sins. There are some sins that are venial, but you have to confess these. You have to try to put these sins aside and do better and sincerely mean it and do your penance and get absolution, or these mortal sins, these deadly sins, can send you to hell. So this whole painting is warning that sin has immortal consequences. And of course, death comes to all people. So here we see an image of a man on his deathbed. This is one of the 4 last things, death. The first of the 4 last things. And you'll notice that, this man is prosperous. He's got a really wonderful bed and covers and things like that, pillows. And over the headboard, there is an angel who's leaning over the headboard and a devil who's sort of sitting astride the headboard, waiting for the man's soul. So evidently it's not decided yet. Death is looking out behind the curtain, behind the arras. He's coming, he's approaching. This man doesn't have much more time. But he's doing what the belief of the time said that he should do in order to save his immortal soul. There's a priest there, and the priest is administering extreme unction, or the last rites. Presumably, the man has been able to confess. Now he's going to be anointed with the holy oil. There is a candle that, if they're conscious and able, that is given to them as their life wanes away. And you can see that there's other religious people here. There's a sub-minister, maybe an acolyte. There's a nun. There's a young man. Could this be his son? And there's a friar. And the friar is holding up a crucifix, reminding him to rely on the merits of Christ in order to be saved. So, it looks quite promising that this man will probably be saved. It is an exemplar of what you should do. You'll notice that there's two women in the next room, and I try to figure that out. I'm assuming that perhaps it's either family members, a wife, daughter, or maybe a friend comforting the wife as the man dies. After death comes judgment. And here they're showing the last judgment, the resurrection of the dead. When Christ returns, as the Creed says, to judge the living and the dead, or in this case, just to judge the dead who have been revived. And you have saints in heaven. They seem to be separated by gender. And angels blowing the last trumpet, and Christ seated on the rainbow with his feet on a globe of the earth or the universe, and the lily of mercy and the sword of justice are symbolically on either side. So it's a pretty simple, bare bones last judgment, but it's got the essentials. Christ is returning to judge, and there's two places that people can go. One is heaven, and the other one is hell. And these are the third and fourth of the last things. So, how is heaven represented? It's is it an ecclesiastical structure? Does it look like a church, or does it look like a palace? Something that sort of shares attributes of both. God or Christ is on this enthroned on this dais, raised up, elevated, with the angels surrounding him, and then more angels kneeling and adoring him, and then in the foreground we have the musical angels. As we look at our left, St. Peter is welcoming the people into heaven. But the devils aren't done yet. There's one devil here who is trying to grab this woman and pull her away. Don't think he's going to succeed, because there is St. Michael, the archangel. He'll take care of that devil. He'll send him away. Michael, the archangel, of course, is mentioned in the Bible in the book of Revelation, where he battles the dragon who represents the devil. And for those who followed the 7 deadly sins, this is where they end up. And each one of the punishments has a label on it for the sin, so that these are appropriate to the sin. Down in the lower foreground, the bottom part of the circle, is pride, superbia. And the two prideful people now have their comeuppance. The devil is holding up the mirror, toads, and this strange kind of bird is sort of attacking them. Maybe it's supposed to be a peacock. The bird of pride. I hadn't thought of that. But they're not having a good time of it. The lustful couple is trying to continue their lustful ways. They're in bed together, but they are being tormented by devils, who pull at them and poke at them and don't let them get along with what they want to do. This sort of pointed red tent says gula, and there is a fat man at a table, and the presumably what's happening is the devils are just stuffing him, and don't want to let him stop. It's horrible. The slothful man is being beaten with instruments of work, instruments of a blacksmith's work, because it's a hammer, and he's leaning over an anvil. And then as you look here, you can see a man stretched out and someone stabbing him. That is Vida. And down below, there is a great cauldron with fire, keeping it bubbling. And within that cauldron, there are coins that are, probably being melted down in it. They're falling into it, and people are in the golden coins as they melt. So each punishment is considered to be appropriate to the sin. The same use of a circle, with quite a different picture, is shown here. This is a walking figure. He's carrying a backpack. His clothes are ragged. He's holding what seems to be either a staff or a club. It's got a knob at the end, so it could be used as a weapon. And he's looking over his shoulder as he moves to the right. And there's a dog who's growling at him. Who is he? Well, this work of art by Bosch has a number of different names. It's one of those works that people come up with all different ideas about who it might be. Your book just used a more generic term, the Dutch, landloper. We might say a tramp or a vagabond or a hobo. But, he's a landloper. He's tracking, he's traveling by foot. So here are just some of the names. People have called this the vagabond, the wayfarer. He's also been considered to be the prodigal son when he is living his dissolute lifestyle. He's run out of all his money, and he's destitute. Against that, some people point out that he looks like an older man. He does not look like, a young man who's come into his inheritance. He's been considered to be the representative of every man, or as they say in Dutch, ilk. A pilgrim on the road of life. Because he has this pack, it's often said that he must be a peddler, selling his wares. There's an article that suggests that he's a representative of the sin of sloth. And I just found an article on the web that said that they thought he was the wandering Jew. Well, that's a lot to choose from. What we can say is he does seem to be on a road, the road of life. So whether we can call him a pilgrim on the road of life or everyman or a peddler, there does seem to be that idea of someone who is traveling through life. And he's looking over his shoulder. Is it a little longingly or is it wearily? What is he looking at? What's going on over there? Well, the house, as you can see, it's not in good repair. The shutter's falling off. It's a half-timber house, and it has a sign of the white swan. And you can see what kind of house it is by what's going on in the doorway. There's a man embracing a woman. This is a brothel. And there's another man peeing against the side of the house. And we see pigs and piglets at the trough. And of course, he said the dog is growling. I was thinking of this, and I was thinking, there are some of the 7 deadly sins represented here. The dog growling could be choler. The pigs eating could be gluttony. You certainly could have both avarice and lust with the goings on in the house. And even the urine is an aftermath of so much drink for gluttony. I don't know if that's exactly what they're doing. Maybe the sin is not sloth, but envy. But not envying something you should want. At any rate, the man seems to be on the road of life. He's looking back at this sinful going on. Has he been a sinner who is now repentant? Or just, every man who sins and then, continues on his journey through life? And I suggest that, he can choose his direction. He could go back to the brothel. He could go on with the road. The road does not lead to some, great perfect place, however. It's a little hard to see in the reproduction, but up on the far distance, there are gallows. So there are still tribulations and dangers for the landloper to encounter. This wasn't the only time that Bosch used the subject. We're going to talk about the Haywain triptych later. And on the outside of the Haywain triptych, there is another scene of this landloper or vagabond, dressed very much the same, knees torn out. He's got that club/staff. He's got in this case, it's almost like a wicker basket, it looks like, for his pack. Things are going on. Some things are the same. The dog is still growling at him. It's a different dog. But some other things are going on in the background. We see a man who has been robbed and is being tied to a tree as he's been divested of everything he owns. And then we see peasants dancing. In the foreground, there's some bones of some, I've been trying to figure out what strange creature that is. It might, I don't know what he's trying to do. It's an elongated skull anyway. And then in the very distant background, you can clearly see the gallows here. So, we have evil continuing in the world, death, threatening the traveler. And, are the people who are making merry, are they just being silly because they're not paying attention to, their immortal soul? Or, is this, pleasant, harmless activity? So there, the two are similar subject. The Adoration of the Magi is, of course, one of the most frequently painted subjects in Renaissance art. Bosch, as we might expect, does it a little bit differently. You can see this triptych, which is in the Museo del Prado, and I should tell you it's been copied a number of times. There's a copy in Philadelphia. There's a copy in Upton House in Banbury in England. There's probably some more. But this is the one that everyone agrees is by Hieronymus Bosch. And now you can see a vast landscape with little figures in. We'll eventually look at some of those, going back to this very exotic-looking city. Is that supposed to be Jerusalem in the distance or Bethlehem? But at any rate, there it is. And then in the foreground, we have this rickety house or stable, that almost looks like it's going to come plunging down any minute now. We have Mary, Christ child, the three Magi, and some other figures. We'll take a look at those other figures. Normally you would think, well, okay, the Magi could have followers, a retinue. But there's some very odd things about the figures that we see in this stable, just peering out of the door. You might notice that the shepherds are not coming around. They're sort of climbing up onto the roof, which is bending a little precariously. Then on the wings, we have the donors with their, presumably their namesake saints, their patron saints. St. Peter for the man, St. Agnes for the woman, and you can see the lamb or sheep that tells us that this is Agnes, because the word Agnes and Agnes are so close. And then there's another figure. Let's take a little closer look. Well, first let's look at the exterior. When the wings are shut, we have a semi-grizzly eye. You can see that there's some color in the donor figures, but mostly monochromatic picture of the Mass of St. Gregory. Now, this was a very popular subject to show the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. As the story went, there was a attending priest when St. Gregory, the Pope, was giving Mass, and the priest had some doubts about whether that was really the body and blood of Christ. It tasted like bread. And so, he had some doubts. And as Gregory says the Mass, Christ appears as the host, as the man of sorrows, as you can see, as the suffering Christ, because the Mass is believed to reenact the crucifixion in a bloodless fashion. So it's a miracle, and proves to the doubting priests that this is truly the body and blood of Christ. So we're opening it up. We're going to look back inside, and let's start with the left side. We take a look at the donors, and in the background we see below this little roof that looks like it's got holes in it. It's about to fall down too. St. Joseph has built a fire, and he's drying diapers. He's holding up what is presumably, either the diapers or the swaddling clothes. In other words, he's helping Mary with what is, usually considered to be woman's work. Now, we might look at this a little differently. Every time I look at this, I think, oh, isn't that nice? Isn't it good? He's helping out. Isn't that wonderful? But that's me as a 20th, 21st century person, who thinks perhaps the labor should be shared a little bit more equally between male and female. It's quite possible, and possibly even probable, that Joseph being taken away from Mary and the baby Jesus and put in the wing at the side and further back, that it's a kind of marginalizes him, and even mocks him. This old man is just good for drying diapers. Or could we look at it and see it in a positive sense? Because, Joseph is, one of his characteristics is that he is humble. And here he's also being very helpful. And I think we have talked about the shift in ideas about Joseph, that during the Middle Ages, he was often the butt of jokes and comedy in some of the plays. He's the old man who doesn't know how his young wife got pregnant. But at the end of the Middle Ages, as we've said before, with the writings of such people as Gerritsen, Joseph became the model of the good father, and he's a good foster father to Christ, since he's not supposed to be the biological father. But he protects and cares for Mary. He's a hard worker who, tries to support his family. In other words, he has what we would consider to be middle-class virtues. Now, maybe Bosch hasn't gotten with that program yet. Or maybe he has, because I guess we could read it either way. We can see some of the traditional iconography, a stable that looks like it might fall down, possibly referring to the old law that is passing away as the new covenant and the era under grace begins. So, it's kind of originally shown, but that's something we've seen before, is ruined stables. The three Magi, each from a different age group, the oldest one, the one who's sort of in the middle, and then the youngest, and also the Magi who represent the three continents of the world. The eldest magus for Europe, the middle magus as Asia, and the black magus as Africa. Of course, there's Mary holding the Christ child on her lap. As the, Ara Dei, or Ara Cole, the altar of heaven, or the altar of God. And I don't know if you can make it, there is an ass there, looking out from the stable. But there's some other figures that are a little unusual. I mean, we sometimes have shepherds, coming. But here they aren't seeming to be coming out to the front. They're climbing up on the roof. What's that all about? And there are some peculiar-looking people, really sinister-looking people, appearing out of the stable. So first let's look at some of the Magi's gifts. One of the interesting things is that the Magi's gifts often represent Old Testament scenes that prefigure New Testament events. In other words, God gave hints through history. He gave omens that were supposed to point people in the right direction to let them know what would happen with the coming of Christ. And of course, Christian scholars would, I also they would mine the Bible. They'd go through and look for these things. The gift that the eldest magus has presented to the Christ child and to his mother, right at her feet, it seems to be some kind of a golden sculpture, and it shows the sacrifice of Isaac. Isaac is bringing the kindling, but the angel is stopping Abraham from slaying his son. But then there's something kind of weird and sinister at the bottom. There's these toads, and toads usually are associated with things like witchcraft and devilry. They're considered to be evil omens. So what are they doing there? Well, one suggestion is that they're showing that even with what seem to be, really good people, we know the Magi later on go on and they're supposed to become saints and martyrs, that evil is everywhere. And, even in the best circumstances, even the best people may have to repent. And of course, we know that that's what they're supposed to do, according to Christian doctrine. This cape over the shoulder of the middle-aged magus is just, as you can see, very, very lavish. And it's a very clear scene that we have King Solomon and Sheba, who is kneeling. Now, in things like the Biblia Pauperum and the Speculum Humani Salvationis, where you have these parallel scenes of Old and New Testament events, Solomon and Sheba is very, very frequently used for the Old Testament type or prefiguration of the Adoration of the Magi. And then down, sort of on the hem, we see a burnt offering, where it's animal sacrifice. And of course, the sacrifice of Christ, shown here, will replace and redeem, make animal sacrifice obsolete, unnecessary, because Christ's sacrifice replaces all of that. A little closer view there. You might look at that crown or helmet as headgear that the figure behind him is holding upside down. It's kind of grotesque toad-like devils on it. Ooh, that's weird. We'll talk about that soon. So we have prefigurations, which are, in some ways, you could see them as a kind of prophecy that God works through history to indicate what's going to happen. The Savior is going to come. And Christ is the fulfillment of all of those types or prophecies that we see hinted at in the gifts and in the clothing of the magus. Now, here is the black magus, the one who represents Africa, and he's just dressed in this beautiful white garment. It's very, very lavish. And he holds his gift, which is spherical. It has what is presumably a sculpture, although it almost looks like it's a live figure of a bird eating a red fruit, and connected with a little chain, another, I suppose, metal, but another fruit that he's holding up. So a little bit like a raspberry, maybe. And on the vessel itself, you can see here clearly, you see a enthroned figure, or a person seated down with a crown and a scepter, and two figures wearing armor, another figure kneeling and offering something to him. And, there's a number of places in the Bible, where someone is kneeling and offering something to a king. One of the suggestions that Larry Silver made was that these might be the three mighty men who come to David, and when they find that he wants water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, he goes and they go and risk, there's a war going on, and they risk their lives to bring him that water. And when he does, he says, he can't drink it because so many people have risked their lives for it. And he pours it out. So it becomes a sacrifice. So you have this, this idea of, as the Magi are kneeling to the Christ child, so these men are kneeling to King David, who is the ancestor of Christ, and bringing him something, that he wants, but I should say he doesn't feel like it's politic to use it. He sacrifices the thing that he really wants. So Christ sacrifices his life. And then there's this embroidery, some kind of fancy work around the hem of the magus's magus's overgarment, and they're kind of chimera. You have birds with human heads. Now, when we think about birds with human heads, we might think of something like the Sphinx from ancient Greece, but this is not ancient Greece. When you're thinking about Bosch, he combines animal and human parts. So you almost think of a devil. So what does this mean? Are these supposed to suggest that even the Magi are sinful, that there's devils waiting for them too, that evil is present everywhere, and of course all men need salvation. Now here is one of the strangest things in the entire picture. Who is this guy? This strange man, bearded, peering out from the doorway, and then he has some other fairly sinister-looking guys in the shadow behind him. Well, what are the characteristics that he has? He has a red cloth wrapped around a seemingly nude figure. He has what looks like it looks like thorns, only in metal. This elaborate crown of thorns, but it's a mock crown of thorns. So the thorns aren't actually going to hurt him. And he's holding that crown that I pointed out to you before upside down. And it has these grotesque figures. They're often called toads, but they might just be devils, along the edge. And then he has something very, very strange. It's almost like a transparent cylinder with gold edging that around, like a big ankle bracelet. But it reveals beneath it there's this big sword that's just oozing. What is all of that? Well, Lotta Brand Phillips has identified him as the Antichrist. And so she's seen these different attributes as distortion of or an inversion of the attributes of Christ. We know that Christ wears a red cloth at the resurrection and sometimes as the man of sorrows or at the last judgment. So, his opposite here seems to have adopted that. He's wearing a crown of thorns, but he's wearing it like a exotic, lordly crown, and it has no pain to it at all. Sort of the opposite of what Christ's crown of thorn did. And, his other crown has these demonic creatures, which suggest evil. And then what they have suggested with this leg is that this sort of glass or crystalline cylinder reminds people of reliquaries or monstrances. A reliquary, we might show, say, the bone of the saint. You can see it through the glass. And so they suggest that this is a false relic. And, the sore is, of course, something really, disgusting. There you see the two crowns. And you can also see a good look at, as I said, those pretty sinister companions that he has here. And there is that transparent cylinder on his leg. And you might notice there's some more of these grotesque figures on this, I don't know what it is, belt that's hanging down. Okay. We also have shepherds who are climbing up the roof. Now, they peer around the shed. They peer through a hole. Well, sometimes there's a window, and it's a tradition that you often have a shepherd peering through a window into the stable of the Nativity. And so we start wondering, well, why are these guys climbing up on the roof? It looks like the roof might just come down below, collapse or something. Why don't they just come out? Or, maybe they're waiting their turn. Why are they climbing up there? Well, one person might say, looking at this, maybe they're just so eager to see the Christ child. They're not going to wait till those fancy Magi are gone, which they have to do because of their social status. So they're climbing up on the roof to get a good view, right away. The other thing is there is a reference and a kind of parable, a sort of a parable like the bad versus the good shepherd, that Christ tells in John, the 10th book. And it talks about people entering not, this is Jesus speaking, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up another way, the same is a thief and a robber. And so Larry Silver suggested that these might be not the good, nice shepherds, but the bad shepherds. In other words, evil is everywhere. And I'll let you decide which it might be. Because, we can't say for certain. They have that spacious landscape, and you saw way, way, way in the back this exotic towers of either Bethlehem or Jerusalem, whichever it's intended to mean. Bethlehem would be closer, but Jerusalem might be a bigger city, more exotic looking. And amidst all this, splendor and, original, unusual buildings, we have something quite homey and prosaic, if you will. There's a windmill, which, of course, you would see a lot of windmills in the lowlands. So sort of exotic and homey combined. But even with the presence of the Christ child in the world is still full of sin and evil. And Bosch, I mean, we don't know what he's thinking, but certainly looking at his paintings, we seem to feel that he is quite pessimistic about man's ability to do good. It seems like in all of his paintings, it's just, sin, 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 sin. Well, I apologize, not all of his paintings. There's some of saints, but there's little devils waiting there too. And of course, there's the heaven scenes that he does on the Last Judgments. But just so many of his paintings show in the background or in other places something that suggests evil. And behind the stable, on either side, you have these what look like two armies getting ready to fight each other. And then in the background of the donor wing, way far there, we see peasants dancing. Now, is that just innocent, good fun and showing us this goes on? Or is it supposed to be innocent and they should be spending time on their spiritual matters, not goofing around and playing? And this might lead to lust or sloth or some other terrible sin. And I don't know. You'll remember we saw people dancing in the back of the Landloper that was the back of the Haywain triptych. So in Madrid. This is in Madrid too. In fact, probably the same room in the museum. It is a motif that Bosch puts in his paintings. Behind St. Agnes and the Donatrix, there's a much more horrific scene. There are wolves who are killing the man and the woman, presumably going to kill this woman who's fleeing from the wolf. The world is not a pleasant place the way Bosch envisions it. Danger, evil, go on. But if you thought that was a world filled with sinister overtones, wait till you see what St. Anthony had to put up with. This is St. Anthony Abbot. There's a number of St. Anthony's in the list of saints. The other St. Anthony, who is terribly well known, of course, is St. Anthony of Padua, a Franciscan saint, who is the patron saint of lost things. This is a different St. Anthony. This is the St. Anthony Abbot. He was a hermit saint and an ascetic saint, the kind of person that goes off in the wilderness and tries to get away from people and mortifies the flesh. But he did found a monastery, so he's associated with the Antonite order. And he had terrible problems. You may remember when we talked about this with Schongauer, and you saw the temptation or the torment, really, of St. Anthony. You're going to see that again here. Anthony, his life story, he is subjected to attacks by devils over and over again. Sometimes he's tempted by them, sometimes he's just abused by them. And this is just filled with devils, and imaginatively as Bosch can think of them, I guess. There's another version of it. When I was looking for the exterior, I found one picture where it was just so dark you could barely see anything. And I found another picture that was all brightly colored. And I know this is supposed to be monochromatic, but I'm not sure how monochromatic. So I just decided to make the best image into grayscale and use it there. As I say, I know it is supposed to be monochromatic, but I don't know if I think there's more color in it than just the gray, black and white. This is the exterior of the St. Anthony Abbot triptych. If you fold the wings over, what you would see during, say, the weekdays, and then you can open it on the feast day of the saint or on Sunday Mass or whenever you're doing it. And here you see we have the arrest of Christ. And down in the foreground, St. Peter is about to cut the ear off the soldier. And then on the other side, also in a deep landscape, We have the carrying of the cross, only Christ has now just arrived at Golgotha, evidently. And then in the foreground, we have the priest trying to give confession and the last rites to the two thieves that were crucified with Christ. And one of them is seated there listening very intently to what the priest is saying. And the other one, probably not. He seems to be a little arrogant about it. And remember that they talk about the good thief and the bad thief. The good thief asks Christ to pray for him. And Christ says that today you will be with me in my kingdom. He believes in Christ. And the other one mocks him. Okay, left wing. Up in the sky, you can see poor Saint Anthony has been carried up into the sky with these hybrid monstrous devils. And he's still praying hard. And you might notice he has a little cross, a little T-shaped cross on his cloak, which is the type of cross that's often associated with St. Anthony. And so the devils took him up in the air and they, terrorized him, and then they threw him back down to the earth. And so what we're seeing next is that other brothers and a person who's dressed more like the townsman in red are carrying poor injured Anthony back to his cell. It has been suggested that the man resembles somewhat that picture that we have that's supposed to be the portrait of Hieronymus Bosch, and that it might be Bosch putting his own features in this painting, showing him helping the saint. We don't know. That's a question mark. And just to show you what some of these little devils look like, this one is the postman devil, or is he sometimes called the messenger devil. He's got a bird's, kind of malformed bird's beak that he can stick a letter through. He's got a funnel for a hat. He wears a badge of a messenger, and he's got these long ears, and I've been trying to figure out where did those come from? What are they? They're shoes or slippers. Okay. I was thinking of animals, but they can be other objects as well. And he's skating. I mean, this is the Netherlands. They like to skate. It's one of their national pastimes. Okay, so we see this little guy skating on the water, which is frozen. I don't know what message he's bringing. And then in the background, we see this giant fish in this red shell, which seems to be both constructed, but it has sort of legs like a praying mantis and a tail that is purely fanciful, and a warrior is riding it. So he seems to be armored, and either that's a wheel or a shield next to him. So maybe he goes rolling along. And then there is a tower up above. So you think of elephants wearing sort of towers that people sit on them. Well, here it is that this strange creature. And the big fish, as you can see, is devouring a smaller fish. And there is a Netherlandish proverb, we'll hear about that again, that says, the big fish eats the little fish. And you can pretty much figure out what that means. That people of wealth or power, the big fish, kind of do what they want with those who have none. The center shows a kind of satanic mass, a mass that's inverted. And devils and other figures seem to be celebrating it. And, so here you have saint trying to go to Mass, and instead it's been taken over by these horrible devils. The whole world is filled with devils. Now, there is a place where the devils don't go. And if you follow where the saint is pointing, go into the back, there is this somewhat dark room, which is presumably a chapel. And we'll see a detail of it shortly. There you can see. Here's the saint is sort of he's either blessing or he's pointing, but it's gesturing toward Christ at what you might say a true altar that contrasts with this satanic altar that is further forward. So, despite all the temptations and the distractions, the saint remains calm, and he's showing us where Christ is. He's looking to us, and he's pointing the way. Amid all the temptations of the world, this is what you can rely on. And here we've blown it up a little bit. It's quite small, so it's somewhat generalized. But you have Christ standing by the altar. He's got the two fingers, he's blessing, but he's also pointing to the crucifix. And you'll remember that on the altar, the crucifixion was reenacted, and it makes merits for the souls of whoever the Mass is directed to, for the souls of mankind. In other words, it's efficacious, or it works. There is a burning candle, sort of the light in the dark world here, the world that's dark with sin. But Christ is at the altar, offering to redeem those who come. You see it again. And some of the details. These figures have been given different names. Sometimes the woman is considered to be a pagan priestess or something like that. And you can see some of these creatures that are made up of different animal and plant forms coming in. This is the demonic priest. He's got a kind of animal-like head, and his garment is torn open, and we can see that he indeed is skeletal. You can see his ribs, his viscera are pouring out. It's kind of distressing. And then the demon with the big mouth open, what is he doing? Is he distorting the words of the service, or making some horrible noise rather than sacred music? On either side, you also have groups of figures who seem to be riding. Well, they're not riding horses. One of them is riding a kind of looks like a plucked chicken, but with a weird head. The head, actually, it looks almost like an open mouth, and then a little head is popping out of it. And he's got the little pattens, the little wooden shoes, and the creature on top of him has some knightly armor and a green veil or cloak, but a head that is a skull of some kind of animal with a pointed snout. And he's making music. Another one behind him, be shouting. And, of course, you have these great fruit or berry-like forms that they're coming out of. On the other side, we have the bottle with legs and the hybrid armored figure. And then the figure that causes a lot of people to look at this, the mother and child. Only, is she made out of tree roots or another kind of root? What is she? And she's riding a rat. One of the suggestions is made that because the satanic mass makes things inverts things from the true mass, makes them go backwards. That this is a kind of parody of the flight into Egypt. And Lorenda Dixon and some other people have suggested that the figure is a mandrake root, which was believed to have a kind of human form. And mandrake was sometimes used as medicine for the disease of St. Anthony's fire, ergotism, which we talked about before in relationship to a hospital picture. And Lorenda Dixon has seen some alchemical and possibly medicinal symbols within this painting. So some people agree with it, and some people say no. This isn't a hospital painting, or we don't know that it is. So some very strange going-ons here. And then, of course, we hear about the fires of hell. Well, supposedly this is the world, but it looks like it's burning up also. Now, the last, the right side, shows Anthony seated there with an open book, and he's sort of hunched over and has his cloak up almost like he's trying to, hide himself away. Maybe get some privacy, maybe. There's too many devils around bothering him. The one devil that's right in front of him, it seems to be emerging from this split tree, is this beautiful woman in the water. And there were occasions, legend tells us, in which he was tempted by beautiful women who turned out to be devils. One of them was called the Queen of the Nile. And so she's in the water, so maybe that's who she is. See all of these little monstrous forms. It occurs to me that this panel seems to have lust and gluttony going on, and probably a few other things as well, because you have, I'll show you some other details. Well, you have this fat man, gluttony maybe, with this woman riding the fish in the sky, which is a motif that you see sometimes in popular art. This is a real flying fish. I mean, it seems to be flying. And then this creature, devil, presumably, which is just a big belly without features, just ears and legs, and it's pierced with a knife. And, once again, I think of something like gluttony with the big fat belly and the knife going into it. But at any rate, monstrous devils, how can he make them up? What can he... People love to look at these things. When you go to the Prado, you can't get close to some of the paintings because there's so many people who are trying to say, look at that, what's that mean? This is a painting that is in Ghent, in the Museum of Fine Arts in Ghent. And it's a panel of Christ carrying the cross, or the way of the cross. And as you can see, it's got lots and lots and lots of heads. And it gives you the feeling that you're in this crowd, that you're right close to everybody. You're being squashed into the crowd, and you're being pushed up against other people. So this is it's supposed to aid you in a kind of participatory devotion. The composition itself is cross-shaped. You can see the cross that Christ is carrying that goes from the upper left to the lower right, hidden behind some of the figures, but it's implied. And then you have a kind of implied diagonal the other way for the good people, the good thief, Christ in the center, and Saint Veronica in the lower left. I'll take a look at all of those people. One of the figures, which you can barely see, it looks like he's straining to hold the cross, and we're seeing this foreshortened view, is Simon of Cyrene, who was drafted to help Christ carry his cross. And then there is this sort of serene, calm figure of Saint Veronica, and you can see she's holding up her pseudorim, or her veil, that has been impressed with the face of Christ, and she's turning away from this mob. Now, it was very common to show evil by distortion and ugliness, and Bosch certainly did that. These figures are caricatures. Not almost, some of them are definitely caricatures, and all of that evil and distortion is supposed to make you realize how evil these people are. These are the two thieves. I gave it away. I was going to say, can you tell which one is good and which one is the bad thief? Which is the one, who accepted Christ and repented, and which is the one who just mocked him and said, we're just going to be dying tortured, horrible death? Well, kind of easy, because you can do it, if nothing else, by process of elimination, because the lower right, the bad thief is, snarling at his persecutors, and they're persecutors, all right. They're mocking him, and he's giving back what they're getting. The good thief looks, what? He's not retaliating. He's looks horrified, but there's certainly made a difference between the two. And Christ right in the center. He's the calm, stable center with all of these horrible, grotesque faces of the tormentors around him.